In this episode, we're going to tackle a critical question. If agentic AI is the brain of next generation logistics, what should be its backbone? Are we building on the cloud? Or are we building at the edge? Or are we putting intelligence directly in devices? So each choice brings trade-offs: speed, scalability, security. I'm Chris Gaffney from Georgia Tech Supply Chain and Logistics Institute, and I am joined by Ravi Maganti from Manhattan Associates. This session is part of our collaboration between Georgia Tech and Manhattan, bringing together academic research and industry expertise to chart the future of supply chain and logistics. So welcome, Ravi.
Thanks, Chris. It's wonderful to be here.
So I recall a statement that I heard from someone I trust a lot, and it was probably 4 or 5 years ago. It might have been Laura Cesari, so I can give Laura credit. And she said, if you are a chief supply chain officer, you cannot outsource the understanding of your technology stack to your CIO or your CTO. You need to understand some of those trade-offs. My sense is now that we're into this world of agentic AI, that statement is truer than ever. What say you about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think the statement is going to be truer than ever. What I see regularly when I talk to prospects and customers is, at least from a technology standpoint, I'm talking a lot about the architecture, technology, or even the agentic AI part. And all of these conversations are happening with the CIOs and CTOs, and not so much the supply chain officers. But with the realm of agentic AI, it's going to, just like Gen AI is democratizing coding and many other use cases, you'll see that it's going to hide the gnarliness of integrating with multiple systems, making sure the systems are in check, and all the traditional IT functions can all be hidden behind the agentic AI, and it can actually help the supply chain side or the business side actually go into the insights of what's happening with their network, what's happening with their monitoring, and all of those things without being too much into the technology piece of it, right? So that's the way I view it.
So when I think about these choices of where your agents live, I put myself in the shoes of the CIO and the CTO, and maybe in this day and age, their first concern is data security, cybersecurity, privacy, and that's probably very important given some of the big issues we continue to see that's out there. In your mind, what's the balance there in terms of the different choices we have in terms of whether the agentic is in the cloud, it's embedded in your existing, solution partners applications, or someplace else? Why are those choices not as trivial as people might realize?
No, that's a great question. Regardless of the agentic AI or any of these conversations that we are having, data and security are really the top two concerns among the CIO and CTO offices. And this is because time and again, even as recently as a few months back, we see this type of ransomware attacks and cyber attacks that happen to companies. And also there is a privacy aspect of it, because in supply chains, you're dealing with people's private data, their credit cards and other such information. So they need to ensure the security of the data and there are no leakages and things like that. Now, coming back to the conversation about AI, unfortunately, the topic is very new. It's not, if you think about a locally running laptop like you're using for this podcast, it is pretty much capable of running everything on its own, right? Even without being connected to the internet, you can essentially get through your day's work. Now, for an agent to work in a similar fashion, I think a few years out, there'll be these new type of GPUs and new computers and smaller models that can actually run locally in an efficient manner to do something meaningful. But a lot of the compute today happens on the cloud. Okay, so what are the implications of that? Is the number one concern is, hey, is my data secure? And do I need to share the data onto these models and other things? And this is where the conversation gets a little complex when we talk about deploying agents and other things in businesses.
Yeah, I mean, if you read it all, you hear a lot about this perception of concern about hallucination and that type of thing. My sense is that has been and can be addressed pretty quickly. But can you explain for the lay person how you really address that? If you're thinking about what I would call kind of industrial AI or enterprise AI, how the way you design your agent or where it sits addresses those type of concerns?
Yeah, thanks. So all of it begins with the LLM or the large language model. So what we saw when these concepts came about 3 years back was they were very good with general knowledge, right? They were trained with essentially all the knowledge about the world and about supply chain systems, because we work in the realm of supply chain. We tend to go in there. So what we noticed there was any type of queries that we did to these models in the early days would give back results pertaining not just to a company like Manhattan, but its overall knowledge of how a supply chain process should work, for example. And what that did was essentially give out wrong answers, or it hallucinated. So what do we do to address that? There are two things that are happening. One is the sheer evolution of the models itself, right? From ChatGPT 1.0 to the 5 model we are in right now, as well as all the evolution of the Gemini models from the Google side. And then there are other vendors like Claude, Anthropic, Mistral, and others.
Yep.
So these evolutions have ensured that the contextualization of the queries and the filtering of its knowledge and providing answers just get better and better with each evolution. And the second aspect of it is most of the enterprise software work happens with a model called RAG, or retrieval augmented generation.
Yep.
So what retrieval augmented generation does is it augments any knowledge on the model with local knowledge, and it kind of grounds it to that, right? So again, with retrieval augmented generation, we actually feed the data to the model and say, within the confines of this model, tell me what the answer is going to be, right? That's one approach. And the second approach is these models also have a concept called grounding. So what grounding does is it ensures that any answer it produces matches to either a tool like Google search, and to verify if Google search results match the answer it's giving, or you could actually have your own data sources as grounding data sources. So between these different tools that's plumbed into the model, what we are saying is we are getting more accurate and more contextual answers, and hence we are able to now build agents that can actually do things in a fairly accurate manner.
Yeah, I again, building my own brain this year, it was a good learning to understand that when you build your own agents, the right thing to do is you rent one of these models that you and I have heard about. Then it's inside of your world. You could put it inside of your data security kind of umbrella. And then to your point, you can kind of say, I only want you to look at these data sources. And we've actually built a RAG here in our team. We've got students working on it. And we've said, feed it all of our research, right?
Yeah.
So it can query all the research that our professors have done. It's not going out to the world and looking at all the research that's been done, but it's tailored. So I think that's now I feel better about that myself. And I think somebody looking at this space who's heard that concern should feel better about that. Coming back to this whole tech stack space, can you think about, in your view, examples where your agents are embedded is a no-brainer in terms of it being better to be embedded in a software application or coming through your cloud provider or something else? Or is it a slam dunk, or is it kind of a 50-50 for these kind of decisions?
So again, I'm going to talk in the realm of supply chain and management of supply chain networks.
Yep.
So with this, my personal take on it is it's going to be a hybrid, right? So if you have seen, regardless of the agentic and the Gen AI part of it that's happened here in the last 3 years, the entire supply chain automation network is a combination of enterprise software like those that Manhattan and others provide. And it's going to be all the mechanization of buildings and equipment in terms of conveyors, sorters, and everything else inside buildings, as well as all the signaling that happens, either micro or macro, right? At the micro level, there are cameras and there are sensors and everything else, RFID readers that's actually tracking and passing on data and statuses about things as they move through the supply chain. And then at the macro level, you're really tracking the transportation, how quickly or where a specific shipment is, and all of those type of tracking, both at a national level as well as a global level. Now, with agentic, it adds layers into all of these, right? So if you look at any of the modern sensor systems and RFID systems, they probably are going to, in the near future, have enough compute in them to be able to make certain learned decisions in the ecosystem of just or just the boundaries of what they see, right? That the boxes are passing through a conveyor, and the camera detects a box that is damaged or opened up. Then two things can happen, right? One is I make a call to the cloud, and then there's an algorithm in the cloud that tells me what to do, and then I sort it somewhere else, which we do today, right? So a lot of if the exception scenario part that I just mentioned, what happens today in all these mechanized warehouses is once a container goes through a scan, then there's a route trip that's happening in less than a second or in 2 seconds that's signaling the conveyor on where to send that container, right? That's already happening today. And with these sensors, and now I'm talking about the edge or more of an embedded type of agentic AI when I talk about this, is you could potentially think of a future where each of these sensors or cameras have their own little AI model that's very concrete and running in a very small space that only does a limited number of things. And when it detects these things, it can actually take those decisions locally and shift it from a couple of seconds to microseconds in terms of reaction time. Now, moving to the broader side of it, it's going to be all of the large data, right? So when we talk about, I know you mentioned earlier that you worked on planning, you worked on transportation. In all of these areas, what we'll find a lot is there's a lot of data being generated. So for this data to be generated and analyzed, it is best to be done using almost infinite resources of the cloud. And that is where we see there's a big push for cloud, as well as for the foreseeable future, a lot of these type of computes that are going to happen at the cloud level.
I think that's very helpful, I guess I'll say. I don't know that I'd thought about it in that respect, because on the one hand, that computer vision example, to make that decision in a conveyed system, you said a second or two, but there are probably plenty of people who are going fast enough where they've said, I need this in less than that time because it's traveling
fast.
It's like, I need to be able to make that decision. And if I'm bouncing up and back to the cloud, even a couple seconds is important. And if the models and the chips are getting small enough, we can put it on the edge. It as you say, it has a very simple decision. Does it look like a puppy or does it look like a muffin, right? Or is the box look normal or abnormal, left, right, right? So that's a good example of why you would want it super close to the action. Whereas you said, if we're crunching massive chunks of data to kind of do the post-game analysis for the day, you might want that up in the cloud where you could take advantage of that.
And also, in addition to traditional embedded systems, you could also imagine this agentic systems to collate all the data and give your audit reports, everything out of that little embedded edge type of compute.
I heard an example from an industry partner that we work with, and they were trying to make a decision that was a transportation-related decision. They were trying to understand how to shape the capacity of their dedicated fleets. And they were trying to find a way to do that further out in the future at an accurate level. And they were leveraging the data that they had within the traditional supply chain world, and they weren't able to come up with quality solutions. But the way they were doing it, and I think they were using a neural network or something that I don't even really understand. They needed and felt like they needed access to data that was a precursor to demand to get a sense of how to predict where macro demand was going to be. Macro demand would infer what they needed to do from a capacity standpoint. So they ultimately realized that they could get the insight through data sets that inferred seasonal marketing strategies and seasonal promotions, because in that business, the seasons led the trend coming into into Halloween or into Christmas or into springtime, et cetera. But they needed access to data that they wouldn't have normally had access. So to me, that's another example where you'd want it to be up in the cloud, where as long as you had your permissions right, you could bump up a supply chain data set and a commercial data set to draw the insight, and the models needed both of those to do that. So
absolutely. And I would venture to say that in addition to the generative agentic stuff, this is probably going to be a combination of multiple things that we already do. And we do well, right? There's going to be mathematical optimization, machine learning, and where the agents can come in on top of this is just to optimize that even further, because through the learning and through the data optimization and the data cleaning and every other processes that happen prior to machine learning, there are results that are coming out. So analyzing those trends and taking certain actions and reacting to those changes in data. You mentioned about seasonality and things like that. This is where I think agents can come in on their own, but it really is going to be an ecosystem where there's already a bunch of machine learning algorithms that are producing some results, and the agents can come in and they can see the data and they can think and they can take actions on top of what they're saying, the changes they're saying, and kind of dynamically react to a changing environment.
So if I'm the supply chain leader, I don't have deep technology background myself. What advice would you give to that persona? If they need to play a role in their organization, either to advocate, for the right decisions for their team or whatever, what do they need to know? What should they be doing so that they're, again, back to being this educated consumer when it comes to this space?
So at the get-go, there's going to be this term that's going around now, which is agent washing. So as a vendor coming in and saying, I'm going to give you an agent that's going to do track and trace. You have done track and trace in transportation for the longest time. What's an agent doing that? Right? We can rename it as an agent and do that. There is that aspect from the outside. And from an inside out, once you look at the technology and you might think, okay, I can do everything and as an agent, right? Both are extreme views. So my simple suggestion would be to look at your top 5 problems today, even if they're problems that are solved and there's a certain manual process or a workflow between the systems that you use and the manual processes that you take in today, and spend time analyzing, making decisions, and changing the way you're running your supply chains. That is probably where the core of the agentic use cases are going to come out. And then the next decision is going to be, do we build it on our own? Like we spoke about earlier when you mentioned that a lot of people are venturing to go build their own agents, which is not a bad idea. Or then find a vendor who can actually give you an agent that's going to meet that requirement, right? And a lot of times what we have seen, even with the ones that we are building, is it's never bespoke enough to be able to completely fit as a glove into your business. And there's inevitably going to be technological undertaking, bringing the IT in, and having that type of collaborative work where you're producing these agents that solve your top problems.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting trade-off, right? If I'm going to someone who's in my tech stack and they solve a particular problem and they're building agents in my planning, my advanced planning system and or my TMS or my WMS, they're clearly bringing a lot of context to what are the relevant agents that are going to be commonly needed. If I go to my cloud provider, he's giving me a Swiss Army toolkit.
Yeah, that's right.
Kind of thing. Is that a fit? And I will say even more than that. Like I said, I went to Manifest, and you go to any of these big conferences, there's 1,000 people there who have the golden goose, one app, one software element, one agent that if you bought, it'll solve world hunger. And if you had an unlimited budget, you could come back and tell your CTO, you found 30 things that we need to embed in our tech stack to do it. Those would be unbelievably tailored to a very particular problem.
Yeah.
But then I'd have to integrate all of them. How do you think about that type of trade-off in terms of when you're advising clients?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very tough thing for the CIO, CTO, supply chain officer who are making these decisions, because at the end of the day, no matter how good each agent that's commercially available is, they will need to plug in their data for the agent to work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There are two ways this can happen. One is a traditional software vendor can produce these agents, and the agents already have access to the data in that ecosystem in which they operate on. Those are going to be examples like Manhattan and other competitors between Oracle, Blue Yonder, and others who actually build and deliver agents on top of their software platform. Now, if an independent vendor comes in, then the question becomes, I do need to extract data from someplace and give it to an agent for the agent to go find the optimality. And then for the agent to do something, I'll still need to integrate it back to these systems. So it's able to call these systems and action on whatever those recommendations are going to be. So back to your question, I would say it's going to always come down to some type of a balancing act based on what's available to them from the Swiss Army knife guys, and whether they're going to build it themselves, versus if they're going to buy an agent from an independent vendor and then do the integration, versus leverage some of the agents that's being delivered out of their traditional software packages that they're using today.
So if I'm building my brain on this, I'm assuming the CIO is going to be thumbs up if the agents are built inside of their cloud provider, if they're an Azure player or an AWS player, and we say, we have our agent capability in there, they're going to be good. We're already integrated. They've already addressed all my SOC 2 compliance issues.
Yes, yeah.
So if the agents come from there, or they come from a member of the existing tech stack, from ERP all the way up to specialized capabilities that we have in supply chain, is there inside of those, the CIO and CTO is going to say, fine, we've already vetted those people. They already API'd where they need. There's really no incremental integration that I have to worry about, and I've checked my data security boxes. So those two paths probably lead you closer to the front of the line. It's the bespoke provider who's a new name on the scene to that company. They've never done business with them, that probably has the more difficult road.
Yeah, I would still have a positive outlook there as well, because traditionally people have bought software for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
So buying this new independent vendor's agent is going to go through the same cadence of vendor selection, checking off all the requirements in terms of security, data, analytics, monitoring, and everything else. And then it ultimately boils down to the value and the cost. So whatever works out for them, I think they'll find ways to enroll those. But I do agree that something that's coming out of things that I've already subscribed for, between enterprise systems, workforce systems, and supply chain systems, it just becomes a lot easier to go build on this journey.
So kind of in our same vein, in a prior episode, we talked about, when did this whole idea of an agent come? You said 3 years. So you'd heard the term agent 3 years ago?
The agent, I would say not 3 years, anywhere between 12 to 16 months.
Okay.
I can pinpoint on when I heard the
You're a
term
few months
agent.
ahead of me.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. But Gen AI definitely made a splash about 3 years, late 2022 when ChatGPT was announced. And then prior to that, agent took on a different meaning in terms of software agents that would act like a call center and things like that. And a lot of people started building generative AI based customer service agents and things like that, because that's the first use case they could go after. But I think in the last 12 to 16 months, especially with the advent of reasoning engine within these cloud providers for the LLMs, is where the agentic use cases came in, because now with reasoning, these models could understand the data and take some actions, right? At least the way we view it, when we talk about agents, the fundamental principle where it's differentiating itself from pre-agent era is the fact that it can reason and make decisions, and it can do it in a loop, right? As things change, it can continuously monitor and make decisions and take some actions.
So, I guess there's two things I'll get your take on. As I said, for me, maybe 12 months ago, the concept kind of was like, what's coming here? Now I see embedded build your own agent capability in a lot of places. In the context of these tech stack decisions, are there any different pros and cons on if I'm going to build my own, or my software provider's giving me a, whatever you want to call it, Lego blocks to build my own agents? Any different trade-offs in that respect if you're kind of now in this kind of build your own mindset?
Yeah, so for sure, right? Everything that we spoke so far is going to be applicable for build your own as well. Because when we spoke about that independent vendor whose agent we want to use, we need to give them the connectors to ensure that they're gleaning all the data they need, and then they have the right access to go make changes in your systems. Now, when I build my own agent, it's no different. And where you build it brings back the same conversation, right? If you're building it in the ecosystem of the enterprise software, you're already building on top of their platform, which has all the data embedded in it and all the actions embedded in it, to an extent, depending on the maturity of those platforms. But if you're using the Swiss Army knife, which are going to be the cloud providers, then you'll need to build those integrations and get it done that way. In my view, it's going to depend on the complexity of the agents that are being built, right? There are agents that go across the scale in terms of complexity, right? A lot of times, you're going to get things that are mundane, that need automation, like processing an email and converting it into an invoice, for example, which is not really going across the spectrum in terms of complexity. But when it comes to supply chain planning, demand forecasting, optimization, and all of these different use cases, there's a need for large data, understanding large data, getting access to it. And more importantly, there's a need to go seamlessly integrate with these systems, make changes, reroute shipments, for example, or allocate orders. There are different things, actions that the agents can take. So based on the spectrum of what they're trying to achieve, one type of toolkit may be better suited than the other. And I think the real value for agents also is in the whole ecosystem, right? So while a lot of today's conversation has been in the boundaries of, of a specific system, think about the broader supply chain network itself and what's happening. The opportunity that we have now is the fact that I can now have independent agents in all these systems, whether it's the enterprise planning system, supply chain execution system, like a warehouse management system, and then use my Swiss knife toolkit to build an agent that's sitting on top of all of this and communicating with all those agents, and building a mesh of agents that can autonomously work on their own. That's something that the potential for something like that is there today, because the less of the complexity of all the data behind these systems and the outcomes of what's going on with your transportation, with your inventory, with your planning, can all be brought together, and a master agent can actually go orchestrate across all of these.
So I think the last place I'm thinking about this back to the tech stack decision is if I'm the user, right? If I'm the user today, and I know from some of the folks I work with, their desk setup, they've got three monitors, they've got different things going on here. But if these agents are in different place, on my desktop, does it matter where they live in terms of what I'm seeing on my screen? Or do you think that's relevant in all to this decision in terms of the actual user?
Yeah, as long as the privacy, security, and all those type of aspects are taken care of, it shouldn't matter where those agents are running, as long as I'm able to get what I need.
And then we said this space is moving super fast. In terms of this decision we've talked about, I think we can give people a lot of comfort that embedded in your core software provider's capability, you're going to be thumbs up. Embedded in your cloud provider's capability, you're going to be thumbs up. You can make a case for a new entrant, as you normally would, to evaluate new software entrants, but that probably needs to be bringing pretty high value bar to get prioritized, right? Correct. So those are three things. Building your own, you could probably do it. That's okay. I am curious, when we brought in ML models, we had to have somebody who was like tending the sheep and keep an eye on those models. Is there any of that dynamic when it comes to these agents? And is that any part of the trade-off you make in terms of where they
For
live?
sure. This space is not mature yet.
Mm-hmm.
So when we reach the nth level of maturity, there'll be self-learning, self-governing, self-reporting type of systems that will eventually be out there. But right now, between the artisans who are going to build these agents for you using the toolkits, and those who can actually monitor, verify that it's doing its thing, and there is going to be a need, just like ML engineers, for agentic management as well.
Gotcha. Okay. As we close here, any one more piece of advice that you'd give to our audience who are probably, 70% supply chain types versus 30% technology types in terms of how to think about this space?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I would think of it on this. What we have seen, right, based on history, there have been this big tectonic shifts in the way humans have evolved. Right, there was the Gutenberg press. Mm-hmm. There's going to be the computer, the IBM computers that came in, then the cell phone, and now we are in the era of agents. This space is going to mature a lot, and all the science fiction we have been reading and seeing about is going to be real through this inflection in time. So I think best way to do it is to stay engaged, use these tools, and watch them evolve. And at least in the space you and I work in, try to figure out how it can be effective to make our lives better.
No, that's super. Yeah. I think about it. It's not a lottery ticket, but it's not a guarantee. So you also have to accept that you have
For
to,
sure.
You're in, if you're not in R&D, you're close to it. You're going to have to accept some bumps in the road as well.
Yes. And we have seen that in the last 3 years, but I'm sure it'll improve, but I think there's some caution to the wind required there.
Excellent. Well, it's been a great conversation. I learned a lot, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat.
Thank you. It's been awesome to be here and talk about this exciting topic.